Hi, everyone, and welcome to a special GZERO live stream, Digital Nations, Harnessing Technology for Economic Growth. This program is brought to you by Visa. Since the COVID pandemic began in 2020, the world has seen unprecedented digital transformation. Businesses, governments, communities came into the digital economy at record speed, as did individuals. The World Economic Forum reported that last year, 60% of global GDP came from digitally enabled businesses. In the next decade, that's only going to climb higher, of course. Well, that's great news if you are in the digital economy, but what if you're not? We're going to talk about the power of digitalization today for both the public and the private sectors, but also the obstacles that are widening the digital equity gap and how to eliminate them. To get started, I'm joined by a panel of top experts. Priya Vora is the CEO of Digital Impact Alliance. Mohammed Abdul Qadir is Chief Innovation Officer and Executive Director of the Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub at USAID. Alexis Sarfati is the Director of Geotechnology Practice at the Eurasia Group. And Rajiv Garodia is the Global Head of Government Solutions at Visa. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I'm thrilled to have you here and to get to have this conversation with you all. But to start, let's just set the table and give a sense of the scope of digital transformation over the past few years and how it's impacted the economy. And Priya, let's start with you because you've been watching this progress. So give us a sense of what is improved and where do we still have a lot of room for improvement?
Yeah, thanks, JJ. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me. As you said in your opening, the world really has changed, not least because of COVID and really forcing people to get online, to learn and to work. Just to take one snapshot in terms of internet users, in the last 5 years alone, the world has added 2 billion new internet users. I mean, that's astounding. It's just record growth. And I know it's not universal. There's still a lot to be done in terms of getting more people online, particularly in Africa. But I think we need to pause and reflect on just how astounding it is to have 2 billion more people online in just the last 5 years. At Dial Digital Impact Alliance, we're not just focused on getting more people online, though. We're really thinking a lot more about issues of trust and individual agency, the extent to which people have really a say or a voice in how their data is used. And of course, we're focused on making sure there's healthy competition in the tech space. And I think the conversation is changing. We need to be focused on these other issues of trust and consolidation of power. Just very briefly, the 4 out of the 5 largest e-commerce companies in Africa are still in the top 5 today. So you're seeing a real trend where incumbents are becoming stronger, issues of economic monopolies are becoming political monopolies. So the conversation is changing, the issues are changing, and I think the response needs to be changing.
Thanks for giving a sort of a table setting for us. Mohammed, let's move on to you. USAID's purpose in the world is providing civilian aid for global development. And so when we talk about digital tools, and Priya just gave us one big, amazing statistic about 2 billion more people being online, but what role do digital tools play in your work?
Yeah, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to speak, and thanks for having me here today. Just provide a little bit of context on, digital transformation from my perspective on these issues. That said, maybe to give a little background, I oversee the Innovation, Technology, and Research Hub at USAID, which is the agency's center for pioneering really the latest, most cost-effective and catalytic approaches to global development by helping partners across USAID and around the world to foster and integrate the latest research and evidence of what works, rigorously test new ideas, methods, and things that we think are really going to scale to be cost effective, and frankly to responsibly adopt the latest technological innovations. So I think when most people think of USAID, they don't think of that side of the house. They really think of the teams on the ground that are responding to the latest earthquake or one of the many wildfires across the globe or humanitarian crisis. But the agency is a lot more than that. So I'd say within that scope, ITR is helping the agency to test and scale these innovative approaches. I mentioned that before. And we house a technology division, actually, which Priya was a part of. And I apologize, I've got a puppy who's made his way into the room and also wants to get onto the call, so excuse me for that. But just to say, for everyone who's watching this live stream right now, rather than sitting in a cramped conference room, we inherently know that the digital revolution is already here. Right? This isn't on the horizon. It's already here. This is part of our lives, and not just sort of in the global north, but all over the world, and the global south included. And it's fundamentally changed the world in which we live. COVID was an accelerator for digital adoption, and increasingly we've got, everyone has a smartphone in their hands. They're faster. They're more affordable. We have more internet connectivity, which is great. And this rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, I think, is really going to be a transformative wave, I think, to all sectors of government, economy, society, and it will be a historic digital transition. I think what's key for us is to really think about how to, frankly, how to ride that wave in a safe, secure way to make sure that we make it work for us to all have more free, healthier, and more prosperous lives. And I think folks at the agency are guided by those principles. So I would say under our portfolio, we're focused on a few particular priorities that I'd like to share. First, that we're supporting the expansion of digital infrastructure that's open, inclusive, and secure, as I mentioned earlier. And we're making investments under the Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investments, which is, you all know, is PGII. It's one of the G7's flagship infrastructure initiatives. And it's attracted a lot of investors, USAID included. So we're very proud of that. We're helping to extend the agency to extend banking service to underbanked folks using digital tools, young women, folks who've traditionally been excluded from doing business by expanding their access to secure digital financial tools. Those are fundamental parts of doing business, in 2023, regardless of where you live in the world. It's incredibly important. We're equipping partner governments, civil society, media, with expertise, sharing policies, guidance, technical assistance, to support them in safeguarding their digital systems. Cybersecurity is such a big challenge for all of us who are online today. And then we're also furthering efforts to close that digital gender divide. We recognize that access is an important part of this equation, and certainly we see it play out in gender. We see it with various minority communities around the world. We have great efforts like the Women in the Digital Economy Fund that we've been working on recently with folks at the Gates Foundation. We're very proud of that work. Excited to continue to roll that out. And to really hit on this point that I think Priya made earlier, look, we're helping countries around the world get connected online. There's 2.7 billion people in the world who are still not online, according to some of our data. So it's a huge, huge, huge gap that we're trying to surmount, trying to make sure folks have access, like I said earlier, safe, secure, and inclusive digital ecosystems.
And we're going to talk a little bit later in the show, Mohammed, on a big USAID success story investing in the digital transformation in Ukraine. I'm excited to talk to you about that. Alexis, the World Bank says 70% of new value for the global economy in the next decade will come from digital business. What does that mean, first of all, if you could unpack that statistic for us, and then who does it benefit?
Yeah, and good morning, JJ, and thanks so much for having me on. To say that the global economy is digitalizing rapidly is an understatement, to say the least. And we've touched on some of those issues, but the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent urgent need starting in 2020 for more robust digital platforms basically reshaped how we communicate, how we work, how we play, but it also reshaped entire industries and business models, and even in some cases, entire supply chains. So as that trend continues, as technology continues to transform businesses and work, and as connectivity rates accelerate and automation advances and so forth, you can see how, as you said, nearly 3/4 of all new value created just over the next few years by the end of this decade is going to be based on digitalization and digitally enabled business models. So in that context, I think it's absolutely going to create new opportunities and new wealth, especially I think in emerging markets with younger populations and with more robust digital public infrastructure. But as
I was
Mohammed
about
just
to say,
alluded to,
I
you,
was about to say,
yeah, no, I was just gonna say you have over 2.5 billion people that still don't have access to the internet. They're basically shut out of the digital economy, and that's only going to get more digital. So there is also this very real risk that the growth of digital businesses could actually worsen economic disparities and in some cases social instabilities. And I think in some markets, some companies are going to struggle a little bit with leveraging data, leveraging digital infrastructure to kind of navigate this new, if you will, post-pandemic world.
Yeah, Alexis, thanks for addressing that. That was exactly my question, which is, as sort of the rich get richer, are we going to create more inequities with this digital economy? Rajiv, where do you see digitization from your vantage point having the most impact on governments?
Yeah, thanks, JJ. Thanks for inviting me. I agree with other panelists on all the points they made around the pace of digitization and the need for businesses to digitize to get ahead. I work with governments around the world, so my team looks after partnerships with governments. We are seeing, among many other things, but our view is slightly led by digital payments. We're seeing three big areas where we are seeing massive impact on public sector. So the first one is this whole space of e-government, e-citizen, which is how governments interface with citizens and businesses. That's a massive area of focus. And we think that is being dealt by different governments in different ways, but that's highly impactful in how citizens live their lives and interact with government, and businesses interact with government, pay for services, common interfaces to pay for things, getting your license. All of that is a massive unlock for the economy if governments do it well. So that's one big theme of impact of digitization. The second one is governments are often a large part of the GDP and economy, which also means they're often the biggest buyer of goods and services. And digitizing that has a massive impact in terms of creating more transparency and more value in the economy, and more importantly, helping small businesses get access to that government buying of goods and services. That's where digitization is a massive impact as a second theme, which we are seeing in our interactions. The third one is the governments often make a lot of social payments and disbursements to some of the most vulnerable in the society. And digitizing that is a massive impact on getting aid and disbursements much quicker, better targeting. We're living in a world of massive climate disasters, and there's a lot of discussion around reaching aid before the disaster happens, so that people can move, buy things before the disaster happens, or reaching money quickly. So digitization has some real life impact on all the massive aid and disbursement programs which governments undertake. So among many things, I would call out these three, where we're seeing a huge impact in societies and economies.
A lot of you have mentioned financial tools when you talk about digitization, and we, ahead of this live stream, asked followers on social media a few poll questions, and the first one was about exactly that. The question was, in recent years, my use of digital financial tools has increased, stayed the same, and decreased. And let's see how people voted. Not surprising whatsoever, increase. I mean, I know even mine has increased significantly. Before COVID, by the way, I had always taken my checks to the bank. I never used my app to just take pictures of checks. And so if that's me, you can imagine how everyone else is doing. All right, I want to turn our attention now to the digital transformation of governments, which really follows what you were just talking about, Rajiv. And when we talk about digital public infrastructure, Alexis, what does that mean? And how has that changed for governments around the world?
Yeah. So digital public infrastructure, DPI, is essentially a government-led digital network that enables a country to provide two broad functions, specifically to its citizens. The first is economic opportunity, and the second, social services. Everything from, to your point about checks, opening a bank account and sending money, to starting a new business, or getting a new driver's license. So I think you can think of it, JJ, essentially as a platform that closes the loop between physical infrastructure, like a data center or a cell tower, and software, like apps on your phone. So digital public infrastructure that's genuinely robust and effective, can be a pretty significant catalyst for economic growth. I think, again, especially in lower and middle income countries, and especially in terms of financial inclusion. We just talked a little bit about the payment sector. And I think that's an area where it's particularly strong because digital infrastructure can make up for a lack of physical infrastructure in a pretty expedient way. In India, for example, which is undergoing, I think, pretty unprecedented digital regulation, policymakers there operate with the assumption that most of India's commerce is going to become digital by the end of this decade. And so they've invested significantly in DPI to the point where the government actually thinks it can be a model that can be exported to other nations, other middle income and emerging markets as well.
Priya, when you look at wealthy nations and poorer nations, when it comes to digital public infrastructure, who's moving faster?
Well, I think Alexis pointed to the real exemplar, which is India. I would say, it's a mixed bag. I think it's hard to say developed versus developing. Developed countries often have issues of legacy systems. Developing countries sometimes face issues of human resources and financial resources. India stands out as an incredible exception. I think what's fair to say is that the challenges are pretty universal in the sense that digital public infrastructure can really be a way to expand participation and inclusion. But I don't think any country has yet figured it out. I mean, if you're trying to maximize inclusion and innovation, but safety and rights for people, I don't think there's one country who has it all together. And it points to the fact that this should be kind of a shared objective, shared learning to make sure we get it right. I'll just note this issue of digital public infrastructure has really come to the fore, and it's notable that the G20 countries have recently signed a declaration acknowledging the importance of digital public infrastructure, not just for economic gains, but social gains, building trust, competition, innovation. And so I think this is, a real call to action for financing agencies, for, the governments around the world to really act together.
Mohammed, then let's zero in on one country that's been held up as a model, and it was funded by USAID, and it's Ukraine and DIA, its mobile application. It's connecting 19 million Ukrainians with more than 120 government services. It was launched before the invasion. So talk to us about what it was launched for, what it did then, and then how it has been helping Ukraine since the invasion.
That's a great question. Appreciate it. And just to comment on Priya's earlier note, this idea, I'm coming from a higher education background, and one of the things we talk about in the higher ed space is this idea of a cumulative advantage, that the institutions that have significant resources are positioned to leapfrog. And I certainly see that we're seeing that, when we think about nation states and their digitalization, like those with the resources are going to leapfrog. So definitely hear what Priya's saying, and it resonates quite a bit. I would say on the DIA piece, yeah, a lot to share. We're excited about it. But let me step back from just to frame the importance of systems like DIA, because USAID is increasingly focused on helping democratic government partners around the world to strengthen their connection with their citizens through the development of secure digital public infrastructure. That's the point of this. So technology is a tool like any other, like a hammer or like nuclear energy. It could be used for good or to exacerbate authoritarian repression, which we're seeing. So when it's done right, countries like Ukraine, like Estonia, these resilient, secure systems enable systems to directly connect with their government and really receive a variety of essential services quickly and efficiently, certainly in times of crisis, which we see in Ukraine. So, maybe to share a little bit more on DIA, in the span of just a few years, in close partnership with USAID, UKAID, the Eurasia Foundation, and several private sector partners, which we couldn't have done this without them. This was truly a partnership Ukraine has really developed the widely acclaimed, e-services platform, what we know as DIA. And this brings really government, as I mentioned earlier, closer to the people. That is really important in a country like Ukraine, and certainly with this brutal war, to be able to stay connected to the people in a time like that is incredibly important. So a little history: USAID in 2016 launched something called TAPAS. That's an acronym for Transparency and Accountability in Public Administration and Services, a program that we had rolled out, which is now in its 7-year, almost $54 million program that supports anti-corruption efforts in Ukraine through things like e-procurement, open data, and e-services. TAPAS, as I mentioned, is funded by USAID and UKAID. Eurasia Foundation is involved. And as you mentioned, this platform connects more than 19 million Ukrainians, more than 120 government services that are essential, important for day to day, for everyone's day to day. And we've continued to support it throughout the war. And the app has evolved, which is really interesting, going from sort of thinking about procurement and basic services to now reporting things like property damage, right? When something happens in real time, folks are able to say, hey, this is my building was damaged, my home was damaged, and then to receive, sort of support to repair it. Folks who are unemployed are able to manage their unemployment status. Things like that in a time of crisis are incredibly important, one, for those services, but two, to also restore that trust in government, that government is there to serve its people, which is something that I've really just come to appreciate quite a bit. I'll pause there because there's a lot to share about DIA, but yeah, those are some of the key pieces.
But I love the examples that you gave, but if you could just expand on that just a tiny bit. We don't have much time on this, but as I'm going throughout my day, how often am I interacting with DIA, just a citizen or small business owner?
Well, I would say, look, it really will certainly depend on what you're doing. If you may have a digital driver's license, you may certainly pay your tax bill online. There was we had met with some of our Ukrainian colleagues who shared that they've built in some additional functionality that DIA has also, when the TV stations went down, they were able to transmit video feed and a video feed and news directly into the app. So it has been used. The functionality has just continued to grow, which is really interesting to see. And I'll also note, I think from a security perspective, one of the things that I've come to learn about the DIA app is that no one individual your information is not sitting on one server. It's not on your phone. This is multiple servers that are feeding into it. So from a security perspective, they certainly thought about it in this context of war, which I really appreciate. And I also appreciate that they have made it open and available to other countries. So other countries are exploring the possibility of adapting a similar system that would be customized for their own needs in that local context. So I'll pause there.
Mohammed, if I can just jump in for just 2 seconds. I mean,
Please.
I think you hit on an important point, which is this all started many, many years ago, the 2016 and even before that in some cases. The DIA app, this customer-facing or citizen-facing tools, only made possible because the government made major investments in the kind of underlying plumbing of the country and the government systems. And I know it's not sexy or exciting stuff to get into, and we'll hear from Carmen about this more from an Estonian perspective, but investing in the underlying systems is what is needed for that consumer-facing application to make sense and to actually be useful. You can't do property damage response if you don't have a registry of all your property in a country. So it's not fun, exciting stuff to talk about, but it's absolutely critical to get those foundations right to make that citizen experience as seamless and helpful as you see in Ukraine today.
Yeah, if I can just build, I want to add one more point to what Priya mentioned is, we've, as consumers also, we're used to going on your app store and downloading an app and it magically works. But I really do want to emphasize the importance of the ecosystem in which something like this exists. The ecosystem enables it to be successful, because an app on its own is not gonna thrive without all of these supporting pieces. So that's an important thing to just keep in mind in terms of long-term vision. And to Priya's point, sometimes these are not sexy investments, but this is a long-term vision that we've got to have for these things to be successful.
argue that everyone on this panel thinks that these are sexy investments, and maybe many people in the audience as well. When we talk about the ecosystem, Visa has been part of this ecosystem. So talk to us about how it's been involved with DIA.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is built on Priya's point about the plumbing, and we find it fun and exciting, Priya. So we are on the other side of the scale. So we think this is one of the examples of great private-public sector partnership, actually. So we did three pieces here. One is when it came to paying for 120 different services across the spectrum of government services. The technology which powers it is a Visa technology called CyberSource, which helps the app accept payments from citizens and businesses in a very quick, digital, secure way. So that's one part where we played a role, is in enabling acceptance of payments in the platform. The other piece which we have started to work on, and which Mohammed talked about briefly, is around using the app to make social payments very quickly. And one of the use cases was during COVID, they wanted to incentivize people to take vaccines. And they wanted to make a payment, I think $30, $40 for people who are vaccinated. And we were able to execute that through the app, through digital credentials, very, very quickly, literally in days, which is one of the things we are proud of. But the same rails can be used to push social payments, even for reconstruction activities, for example, when you report property damage, can be very quickly disbursed. And people can also be able to use the money very quickly because it all sits on a digital credential. So that's kind of, we find really, really innovative here. The last piece, which was actually not digital at all, but was a big enabler, is there are these offline DIA Business Consulting Center for small and medium businesses, which we've been working with DIA team on in opening those in various cities, which helps small businesses become more digital. So there's an offline component, which is actually as cool as the online bit, which helps enable a lot of that. So we're part of these few things.
I love that, because you can launch something, but people need to understand how to use it. And there's a full marketing component to it. All right, moving from Ukraine to another sort of shining star in the digital world of governments, let's talk about Estonia. And for that, I want to bring Carmen Rawl into this conversation. Carmen's the Digital Transformation Advisor for the Estonia Briefing Center. Estonia, since gaining independence in 1991, that government has embraced rapid digital transformation, implementing online voting as early as 2007 and moving all government services to cyberspace. Carmen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Just a quick fact check. We already had iVoting since 2005. And so
thank you for that. I already thought 2007 was way ahead of the curve, and now you've even gotten before that. Give us a sense of how connected Estonia is today and what impact that has on the economy. And then I want to give a little history lesson of what happened in the past.
So Estonia has truly transformed through digitalization. And because we started so early on, we are one of the most digitalized countries in the world. So 99.99% of public services are online. And why I think that our e-state is so special, it's because it has been built up in public-private collaboration. So our solutions are pretty universal, which make our system incredibly simple. I'll give you an example. Our electronic identity and our electronic signature is not only used for public sector services, but also we use our state-issued electronic identity to log into online, to do online banking. Does not matter which bank I use in Estonia, they all use the state-issued electronic identity. And simplicity truly is the key when it comes to onboarding people to digital solutions. And of course, it has affected the ease of doing business as well. We, especially as a small country, we have a lot of small or medium-sized enterprises. And this means that the state's challenge is to make sure that doing business is as easy as possible, because those small businesses oftentimes can have people only focusing on bureaucratic and administrative tasks. So where we've gotten nowadays is that we can say Estonia is one of one of the few administrative havens in the world. It already takes less than 3 hours to establish a company, and of course it can be done fully online, so you don't have to be in Estonia to establish an Estonian company. And we also hold a record when it comes to having the fastest founder in the world. So it took just 15 minutes and 11 seconds to establish a company online. And I do think that our business environment is well appreciated, and the way we've digitalized everything, it encourages entrepreneurship. So Estonia has the most amount of startups per capita in Europe and in the world. And we have the most amount of unicorns per capita in Europe, and in the world we hold the second place. So the very first unicorn you're all familiar with was Skype. So it's Estonian founded, and more recent ones, for example, are Wise or Bolt.
Wow, I didn't know Skype was from Estonia.
Yep, and the very first unicorn for us.
Wow, and you touched on this already, but how you don't have to be in Estonia to start a business in Estonia. And that, I believe, is called an e-residency. Is that part of an e-residency?
Exactly. So Estonia offers a very unique experience where foreigners can apply or have 100% digital entrepreneurship. So if you're not located in Estonia and you want to take advantage of our digitalized society, then essentially people get to apply for cards like this. It is an e-residency card. Essentially, it holds an Estonian electronic identity. People with these cards, they get a way to identify themselves for online services, sign documents electronically, and of course, our electronic signature is always for free for the end user. And essentially, they have everything needed to establish an Estonian company without ever even being here. And besides the fact that they get to run a company in a very effective manner, not worry about bureaucracy, it's also an Estonian company, meaning that those e-residents have access to the European single market.
In Estonia, is it like in Ukraine where I, as a consumer or a business owner, would interact with an app? Or is it that all of your departments are working together? So while you're interacting with different areas, I'm interacting in the same way.
Yes, so actually Ukraine's model is largely based on Estonian one. So we have built up our digital state in a very decentralized manner. So we have hundreds of databases. It's important that data is not stored in one place together, but because of the extensive interoperability we have, we still get to make sure that we have easy access to the data we need to have access to. And I heard you talk about it at the beginning as well. Estonia decided to invest in those sort of unsexy fields first. So figuring out how to identify people online first, how is the data going to be available, and building a strong foundation allowed us to gradually start building different services on top, because the logic how public sector services work is largely the same. We always need data, we always need to identify people, we always need to make sure that the integrity of the data is kept intact. So figuring out these components allows you to move on more effectively and quicker in the future.
It's hard to have this conversation without talking about safety, security, and trust. And Estonia is such a good case study to talk about this, because in 2007, and you can tell us a little bit more about it, but Estonia's public and private sector fell victim to what is still one of the largest cyber attacks in history. So tell us a little bit about what happened, and then how Estonia bounced back from that and regained the trust of its constituents.
Yes. So we did become the first country in the world to experience a nationwide cyber attack, meaning both the public and the private sector were targeted. So public portals, news outlets, also bigger banks. So, and this attack lasted for slightly more than 3 weeks. And I've seen a lot of misconceptions about it. And we can say that, yes, it paralyzed our country a bit, because, for example, the banks, in order to combat the attacks, they had to temporarily cut off all foreign traffic. But banking inside Estonia was still possible. So we weren't as paralyzed as oftentimes portrayed by the media. But it was a very important lesson for us. And to be honest, I would say that it was even a blessing in disguise, because nowadays, because of that, Estonia was forced to focus on cybersecurity back when it wasn't really a popular topic for public sectors. And a lot of innovation was born from this. And even, for example, EU's IT center is nowadays located in Estonia. NATO Cyber Center is located here in Estonia, and we're considered to be one of the biggest experts when it comes to cybersecurity. And maybe one thing we've recognized here is cyber attacks oftentimes don't recognize different borders, whether it be public-private or different nations. So Estonia is very open when it comes to sharing our experience with our partners. And we've gotten quite far, because, for example, last year, Estonia, or the last year from the eyes of cybersecurity, was a year of DDoS attacks for us. So Estonia was at the top when it came to the number and intensity of certain DDoS attacks. And the volumes of these attacks were sometimes more than 100 times higher than what we experienced in 2007. But most of these events for end users went unrecognized. So we do take cybersecurity very seriously, because we recognize that we are a digital-first country, and this is one core foundation, and cybersecurity has to come by design.
And I think it's just incredible, again, as I mentioned before, that you were able to regain the trust of the population, so that Estonia is where...
To be honest, quickly here to add, I don't think that Estonians started mistrusting digitalization. I think that Estonians became angry. But we never lost trust in our digitalized society, and we simply took it as a lesson to be learned. And I would say we definitely have learned from this. Mistakes are not all inherently bad. I would say if you are able to learn from them and make sure it won't happen again, at least in the same way it happened before.
Amazing. Well, Carmen, Maral, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you sharing the story with us.
Thank you for having me.
If we're going to continue this digital transformation, as we've talked about in this panel, we really need to concentrate on three things that you all have brought up, which is skills, trust, and then politics. So in talking about challenges and solution, let's talk with skills. So Rajiv, in a survey of nearly 1,200 global development experts, 62% said that the countries and regions they cover said a lack of digital financial skills is the top barrier to enhancing livelihoods. So how do we solve that?
Yeah, I'll take the framing of small businesses to kind of answer the question. So small businesses, as we all know, 90% of all businesses are categorized as small and medium, more than half of GDP in most countries, more than half of employment. So very vital to any economy. And what we saw during COVID was the small businesses struggled and closed at a disproportionate rate than larger businesses. And apart from reasons linked to what was going on in pandemic, lack of business and stuff, but was also around just lack of digital skills. As the market and consumers moved towards more digital channels, a lot of small businesses could not keep up. The lifeline of any small business is being able to collect payments. And if consumers have moved to digital payments and you're not able to offer those, that shuts you out from the economy in a massive way. So how do you enable small businesses to be able to understand this new digital world, being able to offer a digital shopfront, being able to accept digital payments, being able to use digital tools to manage inventory, accounting? All of that is a massive enabler of what is essentially a large part of any GDP and make it more resilient. So I think we need to work together with governments, both private and public sector, to give these digital tools to small businesses, be it in terms of business skills, be it in terms of tools, grants to educate themselves. And also technology is a big part of it. So one of the things which we are doing, we are undertaking a big enterprise at our end where we committed to digitally enabling 50 million small businesses by 23, which we are on track for. And one of the technology innovations we have done is, instead of small business having to invest a lot of money in building digital payment infrastructure, we'll just enable their phones to be able to accept payments, which is as simple as it sounds, but there is a technology which we built around converting any phone into what we call a tap to pay device, where they can take payments. So there are different answers to it. There's a policy intervention, there are digital tools, and there's also technology to just enable small businesses to compete better.
I'm moving on to trust, because none of this works if people don't trust the digital systems out there. We did a quick poll, which asked the viewers, how confident are you that tech companies can protect your data? And this was shocking to me. So if you look at the results here, very confident, just 4%. That was not shocking. Somewhat, 34%. Not at all, 62%. Which is interesting because a lot of people are working with tech companies, and so it doesn't seem to be having a big effect necessarily on consumer behavior or business behavior, and yet people are not trusting of the companies that are out there. So Mohammed, when we look at trust, how big of a factor is it that people simply are not trusting the digital world, and how do we counter that?
Good question, JJ. I do want to just add a quick point to Rajiv's earlier comment, which I really appreciated his approach, but I want to just sort of extend it one thing, and then I'll get to the trust piece if that's okay. I think there's another piece of this that, you know, a lot of the countries that we're working in, massive youth bulge, a lot of young people, and there's a bit of a misnomer, I think, sometimes today where we talk about young people and say, oh, like they're digital natives, they were born with a phone in their hand. And I think that's a bit of a problematic approach, right? Because on one hand, just because a young person knows how to scroll through a social media app doesn't necessarily mean they have digital literacy. It doesn't mean they fully understand the implications of what they're posting online, of what they're consuming, of navigating these digital environments, of having the literacy to understand, what type of information may be factual or not. I think that's just something that we need to be mindful of. And there's an education component here as well. As we think about the skills that young people are getting as they're going through the primary, secondary, and tertiary education systems, I'm encouraged to see some educators who are beginning to think a little bit more about what does citizenship look like? What does engaged citizenship look like in the 21st century? And part of that is a digital component. So just wanted to throw that in on a previous point. But I would say on the trust, look, I mean, I think access isn't enough, right? Oftentimes our conversations around digital have really been around access, in particular in low and middle income countries where USAID operates. But we can't ignore the actual health of the digital ecosystem. I think that's really important in what we're trying to create, and this includes, newly connected populations that may not have those particular skills. So at least on our end at USAID, this is really about ensuring digital literacy, and that might mean different things in different contexts. So it's important to work with local partners in terms of implementation, in terms of strategy, in terms of really evaluating if that's an effective approach. So at USAID last year, we actually issued something called the Digital Literacy Primer, and that was something we shared with our missions across the development community. To be frank, it was open. These are tools on how to integrate digital literacy across their programs, and we're going to continue to listen and iterate on what that looks like. And I'll give an example real quick. I know Rajiv is here from Visa, but we had a partnership, I should say, with MasterCard, where we were promoting, economic empowerment amongst women in India. And through this partnership with something called Project Kirana, we're helping women-owned shops increase their revenue streams through the use of digital tools, something that, as I mentioned earlier, is really important in the 21st century. We do this by providing customized training in a suite of digital and financial tools that are available to these shop owners. So again, for them to access new markets, get data on, pricing their products, things like that. And frankly, everything from banking to digital payments to accounting and building customer loyalty, all that, those are important parts of any business functioning. And today, this program has supported, really proud to say, I believe over 2,500 women micro entrepreneurs, and more than 80% of those entrepreneurs have reported an increase in revenue because they're using these tools, because we've invested in that literacy and in that training. So again, really investing in those people and getting them prepped for the environment that they're operating in.
That's amazing. Priya, you spend so much time thinking about trust, so I'd love to have you join in on this topic as well. But I have one other question that I'd like you to address, which is, we've talked about people not having access to the internet, and we got a great, I thought, question from one of our viewers, which was, we don't pay for our roads. I mean, once in a while we pay tolls, but for the most part, there are a lot of services that we get from our government for free. So shouldn't access to the internet be free as well?
Well, where to start? Let me take the trust one first, and I'll do a story since we heard about Estonia from Carmen. In 2018, I believe it was, Estonia and India in the same month both had reported attacks on major government databases, the X-Road system in Estonia and the Aadhaar identity system in India. And the responses were so different. Estonian government issued notifications to all citizens. Look, X-Road is going to be down for the next few days. We're going to look into this reported breach. We're going to try to respond, and we'll keep you informed. In India, the government threatened to arrest the reporter who reported on this supposed breach. Whether it's true or not true, it was a pretty dicey response, and certainly shakes the trust of citizens who are thinking, the response isn't to attack the reporter, but actually look into the issue. So trust building is not just a cybersecurity issue. It is just a whole, full-pronged approach to understanding citizens' needs, communicating with them, involving them in policies, assuring them, taking action. It's really multifaceted. And I think the mistrust that we're hearing about is real, because maybe that multifaceted approach is really not employed universally. When it comes to universal access, I absolutely agree. The internet is just a part of being a modern citizen. We need to do more to make sure universal access is true, whether that's through leveraging taxes or thinking about other creative solutions to make it real. But I think it's hard to get in the weeds here, except to say, I would take a little issue with the idea that we don't pay for our roads and government services here in the US. We do. It just doesn't feel like it's coming out of our monthly paycheck in the same way. And I do think there's creative financing that needs to be employed so that people aren't feeling the sting maybe of getting on the internet every month based on your monthly bill.
Good point. Very good point. Alexis, I want to bring you here. Talk to us about the role of politics and geopolitics when it comes to this.
Sure. I think, this is one of these big, broad kind of macro issues that we spend a lot of time at Eurasia Group thinking about. And when we think about geopolitics in this context, we can't avoid, the elephant in the room, which is the US-China relationship. Data is obviously a major battleground in the so-called tech Cold War. And so from a connectivity standpoint, I think the risk there is that there are divergences, disparities in regulation and the application of data that ultimately lead to differences and divergences in experiences and standards from consumers around the world. And the same is basically true for tech-based infrastructure. So as US-China relations remain negative, third countries, I think especially in developing nations, are more likely to choose sides on infrastructure, choose sides on standards. And so going forward, you'd have a lot of countries, a lot of companies even, that are more aligned with US infrastructures and standards that are probably going to continue to quote unquote de-risk their exposure to China when it comes to to tech-related supply chains. So for instance, in Europe, although many countries there kind of retain pretty substantial portions of their 5G networks that operate on Huawei gear, the EU as a bloc and then many prominent member states have already implemented or are beginning to implement bans on Chinese-made equipment. And so in parallel, And going forward, then you have the US that, for its part, is almost certainly going to continue to take steps, not just to increase its lead over China in certain advanced technologies, but actually aim to maintain that edge over China pretty much indefinitely. And so that's kind of the geopolitical angle we tend to look at within these digitalization issues.
Rajiv, where do private companies play a role in here? Talk to me about public and private partnerships work that are successful.
Yeah, I think DIA we talked about is a great example of a public-private partnership. There are many, but we see 2-3 kind of key components of a successful partnership. One is you need to have very clear roles and responsibilities. It's a very important thing to define the role of public sector and private sector, and that's as simple as it sounds. That's a very important one. The second one is the need for a sound economic model for private sector to participate, and I think that's something which we need to give more thought to. Private sector is very keen to participate, but one has to keep in mind the economic model has to be sound for private sector to participate. And the third one, which we talked a lot about, is when it comes to digital infrastructures, it's very important to design them for long-term cybersecurity, for long-term operational resilience. And there has to be inbuilt investments into these kind of programs to take care of those things in the long term. Is the other thing I would call out. But I think overall, it's a great approach to digitize the countries and use the best of public and private sector.
I want to end this hour, sadly, but I have to. But I want to share one last poll that we gave to our viewers and have you all comment as your final thoughts. And so the question was, can digital tools and skills lead to greater equality? And these answers surprised me as well. So we can see them, we'll reveal them, but 12% said yes. Maybe is 46%, no, 35% of people think digital tools will not lead to greater equality, and then I'm not sure, 7%. So I leave you with these numbers to just give your final thoughts, and I'll start with you, Priya.
I think the question was, can they? And I think I remain optimistic that they can, but will they is a whole different question. We haven't had time to talk about women and women's participation. I'm very focused on the fact that women being left out is a huge danger, not only economically, but socially. You know, what does it mean that 15% of Wikipedia editors are women? So truth as we know it is through a man's lens. So, you know, there's a lot that has to be done to make sure that the vision of equality, democratizing access to services and information becomes a reality. And I hope that discussions like these prompt more investment, more action, more collaboration, really more attention to all of these issues. So thanks for putting this on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Mohammed, one thing you'd like the viewers to take away from this conversation?
Look, a great conversation. I would say that our approach has to be holistic in nature. I think that's probably one point that I would make, that, you know, the policy piece has to be there, private sector engagement has to be there, the education component has to be there, and we have to lead with our values, right? We want a safe, secure, inclusive internet experience. It's not a zero-sum game. Everyone can participate in this in a way that lifts all communities. So that's what I would leave folks with.
Rajiv?
Yeah, I think digitization is a great force for good. I think it can drive economic growth. It gives ability for small businesses, women entrepreneurs to be more successful because they have not tools at their disposal to do all of that. But it won't happen by itself. It needs effective policies. It needs effective thinking by various groups to make sure that the rewards of digitization are more equal and even. And the second point is we do believe that public-private partnerships are a way to go and make this happen quicker and more effective.
And Alexis, the final word.
Yeah, JJ, thanks. I just want to impart on our public and private sector friends who are watching that within this environment of massive digitalization, I think the key to successfully implementing the transformation within their respective markets is really striking this balance between over-regulation and too little regulation, and making FDI, especially into the tech sector, as seamless as possible. The multilateral system, the multinational system, I think, has to move past what have been pretty traditional silos and ways of thinking, and actually invite tech companies to the table, as AI, as other emerging markets, other emerging technologies proliferate. I think those are going to, inviting tech companies and related stakeholders is going to be key to effective, safe, inclusive, and equitable regulation.
Alexis, Priya, Mohammed, Rajiv, thank you all so much for joining us today. For all of you out there watching, to learn more about the issues we discussed today and to sign up for GZERO's newsletters, head on over to gzeromedia.com. From all of us here, thank you so much for watching. I'm JJ Ramberg, and have a great day.